All right, welcome back to another episode. Last time we got started with storyboards for the very first time, and we added a button that just printed out to the console. This is our very first step into building out our calculator app. Now, this lesson is going to be a little bit of a long one. We're going to cover a lot of material about how to automatically have your app update to the size of phone that you're running your app on, which is really powerful, and it makes it so that you don't have to write a different version of your app for every single phone size that you support. The thing is that it can be a little complicated, and so we're going to take it really slow, and we're going to try to make sure that everything makes sense. But if you have trouble getting through the last parts of this tutorial, don't be discouraged. You can still move forward with the rest of the tutorial. You can still build the rest of your app without getting Autolayout working completely. All you'll have to do is just make sure that you pick one phone size that you're designing your app for, and that you make sure that when you're running the app that you're always running it on that size of phone, and everything will look fine. Now, at that said, let's go ahead and get started. Promise it's not too hard, but it's a lot. So let's buckle up. Let's get going. So let's take a look at where we left off. We have our storyboard, and it looks pretty good except for one problem, and that's that our button, although it's centered in the screen, isn't going to stay centered in the screen if we change to a different screen size. And that's because the button is what we call absolute positioned. So let's take a look at what that means. If we come down here to the bottom and we change our phone to a different size phone for our layout, we'll be able to see that the button actually moves kind of down to the corner. And that's because absolute positioning means that the distance from the top left corner of our view, our iPhone screen in this case, to the top left corner of the element, or in this case, our button, whatever that distance is, that'll stay the same regardless of the device we're on. And so we want to change that, and this is the easy part. So if we go back to our original screen size here, we can hold Control and then click and drag from our button to the outer, to the screen there, and you'll see it pulls up this option here for automatically laying out our button. Now you can see we have two options here in the middle. One is center horizontally in the safe area. One is center vertically in the safe area. Now what a safe area means is, if you're on an iPhone 10 or newer, there's the little, what has been called the notch, which is the area for the cameras at the top, and then there's the little white bar at the bottom, which is the home indicator. And you don't want anything in your app to go underneath those. Those are unsafe areas. So when we say center in our safe area, that's what it means, is it's going to center within the confines of, those edge insets that are preventing it from going under, pieces of the phone. So now if we hold Shift and we click on these options and then press Enter, it will automatically apply those constraints, and it'll snap our button to the middle of the screen. And you can see that if we go and we change our layout, that it automatically keeps it aligned regardless of what size of a display we're actually running our code on. Now, if we click on the button, you can see the layout guides. If you hover your mouse over one and then click it, you can see the properties for it, and you can see that it is set to be aligned with the center Y in the safe area and the center X in the safe area. You can also go back over to the button and click on the button itself. And if you switch from the Properties tab to the Layout tab, you can actually scroll down to the bottom, and you can see the Auto Layout Constraints is what they're called. You can see the constraints down here at the bottom, and they indicate the exact same thing. So this is just two ways of editing the same values. And you can even see that when we hover our mouse over them, it highlights the constraints themselves over in our canvas view. All right, so congratulations, you've got the first step done. We've already got our app working and automatically laying itself out. So if we want this to actually work with our calculator app, the calculator app has, a dozen or so buttons in it. And so if we want to make it so that this works with all of our buttons, we're going to have to make some changes. We're also going to have to make some changes to the appearance of those buttons, because none of the buttons in the calculator app look just like plain blue text. So I'm going to link to these below. These are some assets that I've put together. that replicate the buttons for the original calculator app. But if we just go over here to our XC assets, we talked about in a previous lesson that this is where our images that our app uses are going to live. So if we click on XC assets, and then we go over to wherever we downloaded our images to, and then we just drag those images over and drop them into the XC assets, you'll see that it automatically creates all of them and it matches the file names. If we click through, you can see, light and dark and the double size and the orange color versions of these buttons. And so we're going to be using all of these from within our storyboard. So let's go back. Let's go ahead and we're going to delete our do something button, because our do something button actually isn't necessary for our calculator app. And if we jump back over to our view controller code, you can even see that the little white circle gets the center unfilled, and that's because it's no longer connected to anything in the storyboard. So off to a good start here. Now, if we jump back over into our storyboard, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some new buttons. We're going to get ourselves a fresh start here. So we're going to hit the plus and we're going to go ahead and drag out another button, and we're going to put it in the bottom left corner. We're going to, since all the buttons kind of float to the bottom of the calculator app, we're going to start there. So the first thing that we see is this button doesn't actually look anything like it. So let's start by getting the background looking right. Now, if we go back to the Properties tab and we come down to the Background section, no, not the image. The image is not what we want. We want the background image. And if we go ahead and click this little drop-down arrow, it'll actually give us the option to fill in the button that we added to our project. And we're gonna go ahead. We're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna rinse and repeat. We're gonna drop down another button, and we're gonna go ahead and hit the drop down again. This time we're going to pick the small dark gray button instead of the double wide dark gray button. So if we go ahead and we select this button, we can go a little faster. Don't have to go up to the plus every time. We can just copy and paste that button. And if we go ahead and just change the background to be the orange color, this is already starting to look a little bit like the calculator app. The last thing that's kind of missing on these buttons is that the text is totally the wrong color and that their style is a little bit wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to go up here. This is the text color option, and we're going to change the text color to be white. Now, we edited button text before in the properties menu, but we can also just click into the text right there on the canvas, and we can change this to a 0 to match the default iOS calculator app. And then we're going to go ahead and increase the size till it looks about right. And we're going to do the same thing. The next button over is the decimal place button. And then finally, the equals button is the final one. Let's go ahead and let's adjust the size of all of these buttons to make it so that they look a little bit closer to how the actual calculator app is supposed to look. Now, the last thing that's a little wrong with these buttons is in the normal calculator app, the 0 button is actually left aligned. The text floats kind of to the left side of the button. And we can do that. There's actually an option for that in the button. So if we select it and we go back to the Properties tab and scroll down to the bottom, there's actually an option to change the alignment. And if we click that, we can make it left aligned. Now, the problem that we're going to see is that it completely left aligns it, which is not actually what we want. We want a little bit of an inset from that left edge just to make it feel nice, feel like it has a little bit of breathing room. So for the time being, we're going to acknowledge that it's not laid out perfectly correctly, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to change that back to center. And in a later lesson, we'll be able to come in and we'll actually add some additional properties to this button to give it that padding. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's keep laying out the rest of our buttons. Now, another option, if we don't want to copy and paste, is if you hold the Option key while you drag on a button, it will actually duplicate the button. So we can go ahead and we can do that. We can duplicate our orange button. The calculator app has a row of orange buttons up the right side of the screen. And once we have our 5 orange buttons, we can come back over here. we can actually drag and select multiple buttons as well. So if we go ahead and drag and select over these 3 buttons, we're going to option drag to duplicate them. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to make our 5 rows of buttons. So we've got our dark gray buttons, we've got our orange buttons, and then for these last 3, with all of them selected, we're going to go over to the properties and we're going to change their background image, again, not their foreground image, their background image, to be the light gray button. Now, the last part of our layout here that might be a little bit surprising is the top area of the calculator app is actually special. Most people don't know this, but if you swipe left or right on the calculator app that comes on your phone, it'll actually delete the last number that you typed in. It's kind of like a backspace key. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a view here. Now, views not only are for drawing, as we discussed in a previous lesson, views are also for capturing touch interactions. And we've kind of already seen that happen with our buttons. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put a blank view at the top, and we're going to eventually make this see-through because it doesn't actually need to show anything. It just needs to be able to capture swipes. So we're going to go ahead and just put that at the top here. We're going to make it a darker color so it doesn't look so egregious. And we'll just remember that once we're all finished, we'll change this to a clear color so that you can see that black shining through. Now, the very last element is the label, and we're going to put the label inside here. And what a label is a label is just a way of displaying text. And in the calculator app, it displays the current value at the top, just normal text. So what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and we're going to adjust the text size the same way we did with the buttons. We're going to go in and we're going to change the properties here. Now, the more I'm looking at it, the more I'm realizing that this is actually probably a slightly different font. So we're going to change this to the lighter font, but we're also going to go ahead and we're going to increase the font size. And, I think we're actually going to do the same thing for all these buttons. So we can actually drag and select across all of these buttons, and we can click and to change their font size here. We just type in a new font size for all of these buttons since we're going to want them all to be the same. And then we're also going to change all of their styles to the light style. Once we're finished with that, we can go ahead and click the Done button, and we'll be able to see that, except for the fact that the buttons have the wrong text in them and the text at the top just says label, this is actually pretty close to our calculator app. All right, so this is the part that I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, that if you get lost in this area and this is not making sense, you get stuck, that's okay. You don't actually have to finish this part. This part just helps you understand how you can take that basic layout system we created at the beginning that just centered our button and do something really pretty magical, and that's make our entire calculator app scale to fit the entire screen for whichever phone size we're going to put our calculator on. So like I said at the beginning, the calculator sort of floats to the bottom. All the buttons are aligned with the bottom. And so let's go ahead and we're just going to nudge these buttons into place. And you can nudge buttons into place by selecting a button, and then if you hold the Option key, you'll get these little alignment guides. So we're going to go ahead and nudge these buttons into place with the arrow keys while we're holding Option. Now it looks like these are supposed to be about 42 points from the bottom and 16 points from the edges. So we're going to nudge those into place. Now after we've got these all nudged into place, you're going to notice that this decimal button, the single width dark gray button, is kind of in an awkward place because it doesn't have a place to align to. The large button aligns to the left edge, the orange button aligns to the right edge, and so we're going to have to figure out what to do with that. So let's figure that out by making our layout automatic. So what we're going to do is if we click on the extra large button, we can come down here and there's an auto layout button that will pull out all the layout options that we have. And we can make it so that it automatically aligns to the bottom of the screen and the left of the screen. And then we'll also want it to maintain the aspect ratio. Aspect ratio just means it'll always keep the shape regardless of what size it is. Now, this decimal place button, we can go ahead and align it to the bottom, but that's all we really know about it so far. And then the equals button, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to open the alignment menu, and we're going to tell it to always align to the right edge and to the bottom edge. So now we've got this awkward space to deal with. If we control drag between these two buttons, we get the option to horizontally constrain them to each other. If we click on that constraint and go over to our properties editor, we can change that constraint to be a consistent size of 16. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the decimal button to the equals button. We're going to make it equal to 16. Now, immediately as it tries to figure out this layout, we've got a problem. And that's that it recognizes what we recognize, that all of the things that we have told it can't be true at the same time. These buttons can't stay the size that they are, and they can't all be equally spaced apart. So how do we solve this? Well, in this case, it's pretty easy. We can actually just take our extra large button and tell it to be equal in size to the other two. So if we control drag from our large button to the smaller dark one, it'll create a height constraint. You'll see it gives us the option for a height constraint. And the height constraint, nothing changes immediately, but if we come over here and click on it, you'll see that it has a multiplier. And the reason why it has a multiplier is the heights aren't equal right now. And so it says, oh, well, if you want me to constrain them together, I've got to multiply one of them by some number to make them equal because they're not currently equal. And that's not what we want. We want it to force it to be equal. So we'll come in here after we select the height constraint, and we can change it to whatever we want. We can make it double, so it would make it so that the height is always double the size of the other one. Or, I mean, we can do what we actually want, and we can change it to be equal to each other, so a multiplier of 1. And so if we go ahead and we pick some other sizes, small's not really working, so let's go bigger to illustrate the point here, that our buttons keep their consistent spacing and they grow to fill the space, and they stay the same sizes as each other, which is exactly what we want. This is going to be the foundation of every single button that we're going to have. Now, at this point, if that is not working for you, rewind, try and understand where you went wrong. And if you have a problem, leave it in the comments below and I'll try to help you out. But if you don't have those three working, everything else is going to depend on that. So don't go forward until those three buttons are laying out correctly and you can change to the bigger iPad screen sizes and have them actually lay out correctly. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to go to the next orange button. Now, if we control drag from our next button to the one that we've already got laid out correctly, you'll see that we have options. Now, one of them is we want to align to the trailing edge. That's the right edge. And we want these to be the same width, the same height, and we want them to have a nice even spacing between each other. Now, if yours currently isn't snapping into place, it's not aligned properly, you can select the button and press Command Option Equal, or you can go up to the Editor menu and click Update Frame, and that'll just snap it into place. Now, we're going to have a problem because Autolayout has already applied to our bottom three buttons, which means we're going to have the same multiplier issue that we had in our previous one. So if we hover and click on our constraints, we're going to go ahead and we're going to update all of those to have a multiplier of 1 again. Again, this was just Xcode trying to be helpful and say, hey, if you want the layout that you have put on the canvas, I'm going to have to multiply these because they're not currently equal. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change that multiplier. We're going to set it equal to 1, and that should make it snap into place. All right, now let's rinse and repeat. Now if we control drag, we do trailing, and we do equal heights, vertical spacing, and we're going to do the same thing, equal heights, vertical spacing, trailing edge, and then our last one, equal widths, equal heights, trailing edge alignment, and vertical spacing. Oh, it looks like I missed one here. Let's go ahead and press Command Option equals to get that aligned. Same thing here, Command Option equals, and snaps them right into alignment. Now, as again, you can see we have this multiplier issue, and the reason why we went ahead and did a whole bunch of buttons is that if we update the multiplier on one, because they kind of cascade and they all rely on each other, if I update the one in the chain to get it right, all of them are going to follow suit now, which is awesome for us. Now, the one other issue, and this is the exact same issue, just manifesting in a different way, is that the spacing isn't going to be quite right. And that's because it tried to match the layout that we had on the screen when we set the constraints up. So what we're going to want to do here is after we go through and we make sure all our height and width constraints have a multiplier of 1 and that they're all looking correct, we're going to want to update our other constraints as well. So if we click on it and we just hover on the little spacing constraint, and we go ahead and change that from a constant of 14 point whatever to just a plain 14, we can get ourselves a little bit better spacing here. You can see that aligns that and changes from 17 to 14. And now we've got something that actually looks like a nice, even, consistent spacing. Now this is another good checkpoint. If this isn't working for you, rewind to the last checkpoint and try your buttons again. Try and get those constraints working. You can also select constraints and delete them. So you make sure you get that. And because all these constraints are reliant on each other, we want to make sure that they get working piece by piece. If any one piece is broken, you can't really move forward until you have the previous piece working the way it's supposed to. All right, so to try and save ourselves a little bit of a headache, we're going to just lay out these buttons a little bit nicer, and hopefully we'll get some slightly better results first try this time. We're going to go ahead and hold Option and use the arrow keys to nudge the button into place again. And this is a lot of reusing the same tricks that you just get used to after you've made a few interfaces in Storyboard. All right, well, that looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to do the exact same thing we did on the previous row. We're going to go ahead and control click, and we're going to do trailing space, equal widths, equal heights. We do vertical spacing, trailing widths, equal heights, and widths. We're going to control drag again, vertical spacing, trailing edge, equal width, equal height. And our last one for this row, vertical spacing, trailing edge, leading widths, leading heights, equal widths and equal heights. All right, so we're going to come in here and we're going to fix our multiplier again, exact same issue. And we should see things start cascading into place. Looks like we got a little closer result first try. Let's fix those. We're just going to go through and click on the buttons and update each of their vertical spacing constraints so that they're consistent. All right, looks like we have a little bit of a mistake. These are all supposed to be 14. So if we can just go back through here, get our height constraints lined up to be 14, and then we should have a nice clean layout where everything looks like it's aligned properly. All right, one more row. We're going to do a little bit more of the exact same thing. Now this one's a little less obvious because we can't just say equal widths and equal heights again, because then it would make this button double wide, which is not what we want. So what we're going to do here is we're going to constrain the aspect ratio on this guy so it stays square. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to click this bottom constraint. We're going to set it equal to 14. And now that gets us pretty close. If we control drag down, then we can go ahead and add the trailing space and equal heights. So we do want it to be the same height. We don't want it to be the same width. And again, the same issue with the multipliers. So if we come back in here and we update the multiplier to be a multiplier of 1, then it'll fix it. But again, because these cascade and we want to save ourselves some work, we're just going to go ahead and set up all the constraints and then we'll fix the multipliers at the end. So it's going to be more of the same: vertical spacing, align to the trailing edge, equal widths, equal heights. And this shouldn't be that surprising that these are all the same because they all kind of float together in the exact same way. And if this seems a little monotonous, this is good practice. It'll help you get familiar with the interface. And at the end, you're actually going to have quite the complex layout. So this will be something that you can actually be pretty proud of how much you've managed to do in your first UI layout. All right, so let's go through. We're just going to fix our spacing and our multipliers again, just so everything looks like it's lined up right. And it looks pretty good. You can see that trailing edge there is lined up nicely. The widths and heights look good. And so now we're going to do our final row. Now this one is going to be different. Again, same problem. We don't want it to be the equal width and height as the big button below it. We do want it to be the same height and width as the button next to it. We want it to have nice spacing, but we don't want it applied to the trailing edge anymore. And that's because in this case, this button is applied to the left edge. It's the leading edge is what this is called. So as we constrain this button, we're going to do it just slightly different, but this is more or less the same thing. So we're going to control drag again, and we're going to pick leading edge this time instead of trailing. We're going to do vertical spacing again, and we're going to do equal heights again, and then we're going to do a different little trick. So previously we did aspect ratio from that menu. I just want to show you, you can also do aspect ratio from this bottom menu down here as well. All right, so now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and we're going to control drag, and we're going to do the same thing that we've done in previous, except for we're going to do leading edge instead of trailing. So leading edge, equal widths, equal heights. Vertical spacing, leading edge, equal widths, equal heights. And then the last one, vertical spacing, leading edge, equal widths, equal heights. And then we're going to go through and we're going to fix our spacing and our multipliers to be what we want. So in this case, let's find the constraint that is the height constraint, and we're going to change the multiplier to be 1. And the aspect ratio automatically updates the width for us. We can go through and we can find all the height, the vertical spacing constraints, and we're going to go change all of those to be 14. And the end result here should be a nice even grid of buttons that looks really great and looks almost identical to the calculator app that comes on your phone. In fact, it should be as close to identical as you can get without being able to peek at their code. All right, so here's the last thing that we're going to do to get this layout just right. We want this swipeable area to always fill this area that is above the buttons. So the first thing we're going to do is adjust the alignment here, and then we're going to go through and we're going to adjust our constraints with the constraint menu. Now, by default, all of these 0 constraints, 0 meaning line exactly with it, are automatically going to be applied to safe areas, which is not actually what we want. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this little drop arrow, and we're going to change it from safe area to view. And that's because we want this to literally go edge to edge, even under the cameras and the home indicators. Whatever might be blocking it, this is an invisible swiping area, so we want it to go all the way. You can see that as soon as we commit these changes, so we have 0 on all the edges, it automatically fills itself all the way up to go edge to edge with the buttons and the screen and the top, even going underneath the camera array. All right, and that leaves our final piece that needs to be laid out, which is our label. Now, the label, we've already got sized what looks pretty dang close to the original calculator app. So what we're going to do here is we're going to apply a lot of the same constraints that we've done in the past to get the width and height and the edge spacing just right. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to set all of these to be 26 on the sides and 14 on the bottom. And that'll match really close to what the calculator app does on your phone already. And then the last thing we want is we want this to be right aligned. You'll notice that by default, the label is laying out everything to the left edge, which is not what we want. We want this to actually float to the right edge so that it matches the calculator app. And that's actually really easy to do. Once we have our label centered properly and we're happy with everything, we can just go back over to these properties and we can change the alignment from left edge to right edge. Now, at this point, except for the light gray top, this should look like a pretty identical replica of the layout that you would see in your calculator app. So let's go ahead. Let's change this to a clear color. Run again. And that's pretty spot on. So what we'll need to do next is we'll have to make it so the label actually updates with what the user types in. And we're going to go ahead and update all the buttons so that they accurately reflect what they're supposed to. Besides that, you have just completed a very complex layout and something that will automatically adapt to any screen-sized iPhone that you apply it to. So congratulations on the hard work, and we'll catch you on the next one.